In the U.S., the new Trump administration is starting to take shape. Sources close to Donald Trump say the president-elect will likely confirm Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. The Florida senator was Trump's rival for the 2016 Republican presidential nomination, but now aligns with his stances on China and Ukraine. He's a Cuban-American and would be the first Latino to hold the post. Meanwhile, there's plenty of speculation about which Trump loyalists could fill the other top jobs. Let's have a look.
This man could be Donald Trump's chief of downsizing. Elon Musk is Donald Trump's highest profile supporter, and Trump has publicly spoken of putting him in charge of eliminating government waste, even as Musk does billions of dollars in official business with the US. Musk's unofficial influence is already significant. He's reportedly joined phone calls between Trump and foreign leaders. Then there's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., an outspoken vaccine skeptic who may head the Health and Human Services Department, raising worries about what would happen if another pandemic were to occur. And for the top diplomatic post, U.S. media reports point to Marco Rubio as Trump's expected choice as Secretary of State. The senator from Florida is known to take a hard line on China and Iran, and he voted against a major Ukraine aid package this year. Other names being suggested include Rick Grinnell, the combative former ambassador to Germany, and Robert O'Brien, who was Trump's former national security advisor. Mike Rogers has been mentioned for the top defense job. He's a Republican member of Congress with a hawkish reputation, and unlike many in Trump's world, is a strong advocate of arming Ukraine and increasing defense spending. Trump has also mentioned Christopher Miller, who worked under his last administration and was involved in Project 2025, a wish list of government reform that would give Trump more power. He's announced that the United Nations ambassador is Elise Stefanik, a staunchly pro-Israel Republican representative from New York. And Trump has already made one major pick. He appointed his campaign co-chairwoman, Susie Wiles, as chief of staff. She'll control access to the president and help set the administration's policy agenda. What they all have in common besides right-wing credentials is proven loyalty to Trump. But the president-elect faces obstacles in appointing loyalists. Cabinet posts must be confirmed by the Senate, which means dealing with Democrats who may refuse to let his nominees have hearings. Trump has proposed changing the way the Senate works to allow him to appoint candidates while the Senate is not in session. Trump may also resort to appointing acting cabinet members, as he often did in his first term. These people are easy to fire and don't have to be confirmed by the Senate, and that makes their own views less important, as their jobs depend on one thing: pleasing the boss.
Let's bring in William Glucroft here. He's an American political analyst and deputy editor of the Brussels-based The Parliament magazine. Good to see you, William. Let's start with Trump's apparent pick for foreign policy chief, Marco Rubio. What kind of Secretary of State would he be?
Morning, Terry. Well, first of all, as you yourself said at the top, we should note that these are sort of unofficial. They are looking likely. It looks likely that Marco Rubio will be picked by Donald Trump. But of course, Donald Trump can change his mind. And we know that Donald Trump has a history of changing his mind. But Marco Rubio is, as we heard in that report, a outspoken hawk when it comes to Iran, China, Venezuela. He's called for negotiations in winding down the war in Ukraine, calling it a stalemate, and that there needs to be some kind of solution there. So Marco Rubio has quite a few credentials when it comes to foreign policy. Whether you agree or disagree, he has put himself out front on some of these issues. In fact, he actually predates Donald Trump on a lot of this hawkishness, especially when it comes to China. He came into power in the Senate in the so-called Tea Party movement, this sort of a proto-America First movement within the Republican Party that was before Donald Trump, that wanted to look more inwards and wanted to take more hawkish position on things like China to give the United States, or at least try to give the United States, an upper hand. So Marco Rubio fits right in with Donald Trump's worldview. It would make sense for him to be a Secretary of State pick.
If confirmed, and again, as you pointed out, Trump is known to change his mind, but if confirmed, Rubio might be tasked to help fulfill Trump's promise to end the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. What sort of foreign policy or diplomatic expertise does Rubio have that would recommend him for those tasks?
Right. We're a long way from any of these positions, because we also heard in that report that, of course, the confirmation process can be very long. And even though Democrats don't have a majority in the Senate, they do still have a say in pushing some of these positions through. But Marco Rubio, he sits on the Intelligence Committee. He sits on the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. So he does have access to high-level intelligence, to classified information. He does know what's on the forefront of U.S. intelligence thinking, of what's hotspots around the world, conflict areas that the United States is involved in, which seems to be an increasing number these days. So Marco Rubio certainly is informed when it comes to what's going on. And we should point out, the current administration with Antony Blinken being Secretary of State, it's not like conflict or diplomacy, or should I say, it's not like conflict has been retained or restrained under the last several years, and it's not like diplomacy has really had this upper hand in the last several years. So there's no saying what might happen, of course, with a Marco Rubio State Department under a Trump administration. A lot of things will be dictated by events, and these things are just really difficult to predict.
So sticking with the potential lineup there, let's not forget Elon Musk. He's a huge Trump supporter, of course. Any idea what role Musk might play, if any, in the next Trump administration?
It's a great question. It's what a lot of people are asking. Right now, what he's doing is seeming to be hanging out and enjoying himself at the Mar-a-Lago resort, Trump's sort of seat of operations right now in Florida. Reports have it that he's kind of there, sitting in on meetings, jumping into phone calls, and sort of being Donald Trump's tweeter-in-chief, putting his thumb on the scale of public opinion right now for those who are in the Twitter space or the X space. With his support for Donald Trump's various picks. It's really unclear if Elon Musk will even end up with any kind of position. He might not want it. It might be better for him and more influential for him, and of course certainly less scrutiny for him if he adopts some kind of informal role that doesn't actually have any kind of oversight in Congress. If he doesn't need to be confirmed by anybody, or actually have anybody looking through his records, he can just kind of sit on the phone with Donald Trump wherever that might be, whether it's at Mar-a-Lago or back in his home in California. So this is something to watch if this sort of efficiency commission will really take shape. Elon Musk, like Donald Trump, very unpredictable. What they say one day could be very different the next day.
William, thank you very much. Political analyst William Glucroft there. Well, to see how Trump's personnel choices are going down in Ukraine, let's cross over to DW's Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Nick, Marco Rubio could become Trump's next Secretary of State, and Mike Waltz, his national security advisor. These are two hardliners who oppose more U.S. spending to help Ukraine defend itself. What's the reaction in Kyiv?
Look, Terry, I think people are now going to Google who Mike Waltz is, what his track record is. This is not a name, unlike Marco Rubio, that lots of people were aware of previously. I think the kind of initial takeaway is this is less bad than most Ukrainians were expecting. Yes, these are people who've been critical about continued support for Ukraine in the same kind of volumes we've been seeing, but they are not people from, say, the Elon Musk orbit who have, questioned kind of Ukraine's, battle in its totality. These are people who are saying it's just too expensive, Europe needs to do more, this is not our task, we should focus on China. So I think the initial takeaway is this could have been a lot worse if it indeed is happening this way. But again, the bigger question is how much influence will these people have? We've seen in the first Trump White House that people in the official post don't always have the say, and that people that Donald Trump is on the phone with, be that Elon Musk or Vladimir Putin, can sometimes have more influence over him. People here are very conscious of the fact that when he was president last time around, Trump, having met Putin, said that he basically trusted Putin's take on things more than he did his own intelligence agencies. So I think, even if these names are there, even if they say things that from a Ukrainian perspective are less scary than could be, it doesn't mean that actually they will end up having the say and being able to influence policy in a way that would make things less bad for Ukraine.
Let's take a closer look at the situation in Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities are warning that Russia is gearing up for a massive attack. We just saw 6 people killed and dozens wounded in air raids on several cities. Ukraine's military says there are indications that Moscow is planning a major ground and air offensive. This comes as Russian forces have been making gains on the front line.
Ukraine is facing a critical moment in its battle against Russia's full-scale invasion. There have been record numbers of Russian attacks across the country, from the southern city of Zaporizhia to missile strikes on Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown in central Ukraine, to the Russian-occupied eastern regions. Fighting along the more than 1,000-kilometre front line is stretching Ukraine's troops at a critical moment. The hard-pressed military is battling some 50,000 troops in Russia's Kursk region. There's also a push to reinforce the front lines in the east and ward off an anticipated infantry assault in the south. All of this at a time of political uncertainty exacerbated by Donald Trump's win in the US presidential election.
On the Ukrainian side is saying basically that this is Russia's response to Donald Trump. In other words, Donald Trump has not calmed down Putin, quite the opposite. Russia is showing that it is going to continue the course and accelerate its advancements in the Donbass.
There are growing concerns in Kyiv that a Trump White House will prioritize peace at the expense of Ukraine's territorial integrity. Russia currently controls just under a fifth of Ukrainian territory, and the Kremlin has implied that relinquishing this land may be the minimum price Kyiv has to pay for peace.
Our Ukraine correspondent Nick Connolly is still with us. Nick, what's your take on the trajectory of the war in Ukraine in the wake of the U.S. election? Does Ukraine still have a chance of winning this war if U.S. support is not maintained?
I think it's not as clear a kind of duality as more of the same or no help at all, right? There are lots of options for Trump to loan money to Ukraine to basically give equipment in return for, the promise to pay back in the future. That is something that is now being discussed more actively. But I think it's not like Ukraine is going to just roll over and basically give in and capitulate just because America is getting cold feet. I think, if you look at what Vladimir Putin is still demanding, it's not just territory, it's about basically Ukraine reducing its army, being constantly open to further Russian incursions, and basically, leaving the door open for continued Russian control of this country. So I don't think that Ukraine is going to suddenly change its mind, give up on what it's been fighting for a few years, but it is going to be a lot harder, and the Europeans are going to have to do a lot more.
Nick, thank you very much. That was our correspondent Nick Connolly there in Kyiv.